There is a photograph from Easter Sunday 2026 that the British press has been studying like a piece of evidence in a courtroom. And the longer you look at it, the more it tells you. At St. George's Chapel in Windsor, the Wales family arrived together, Prince William and Princess Catherine, their 3 children flanking them on either side. After years of illness, absence, and quiet speculation about whether the family was holding together at all, they were back in public, unified and unmistakably solid. The cameras could not look away. And right beside William, positioned close and deliberate, stood Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh. His son James was near him. Princess Anne was there. The core of the working royal family had arranged itself around the Prince of Wales like the walls of a fortress. Now look for Queen Camilla. Look for her people. They were not in that formation. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, stripped of his titles by King Charles in October 2025, and arrested at his Wood Farm residence on the Sandringham estate on his 66th birthday in February 2026, was absent entirely. His daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, did not appear beside William either. The gravitational pull that once kept Camilla's orbit of family members close to the center of these occasions was gone. And the people who had taken their place, William, Catherine, Edward, and had formed a new center, a new court, and they had drawn it precisely, with no accident and no ambiguity. Royal protocol at an event like the Easter service at Windsor is not casual. Every position in that lineup is decided in advance. Every face that appears on camera near the heir to the throne is placed there intentionally. Someone drew that map. And on that map, Camilla's world was somewhere else entirely. For most of his adult life, Prince Edward was the royal the British public forgot existed. Born on March 10, 1964, he is the youngest child of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. He is currently 15th in the line of succession. He briefly trained with the Royal Marines before leaving to work in theater production. He spent years running a television production company called Ardent Productions that attracted tabloid mockery. He married Sophie Rhys-Jones in 1999 in a relatively modest ceremony. For 3 decades, he was considered the least consequential senior royal, cautious, careful, resolutely undramatic. And then, quietly, everything changed. When King Charles was diagnosed with cancer and stepped back from public duties in early 2024, Edward and his wife Sophie, now the Duchess of Edinburgh, stepped forward without being asked. They took on solo international tours, traveling to Papua New Guinea and Japan, carrying out high-visibility engagements where they represented the king and the entire United Kingdom. According to reporting in The Telegraph, palace insiders praised Edward's inner steel during this period. In 2023 alone, he undertook 297 royal engagements, the 3rd highest total of any royal that year, behind only King Charles and Princess Anne. He was doing the structural work of a monarchy that needed him, and he was doing it without noise. According to YouGov's August 2025 favorability tracker, Prince William held a 74% positive rating, Princess Catherine sat at 71%, and Princess Anne at 70%. King Charles was at 59%. And Camilla, despite years of careful image management, sat at just 43% positive, with 44% of the British public holding a negative opinion of her. Edward, though not included in every tracker, sits around 50 to 51% positive approval, with only 19% holding negative views of him. A man that most Britons could not have picked out of a lineup 10 years ago was now, statistically, more trusted than the woman wearing the crown. To understand what is unfolding now, you have to go back to February 2023. King Charles and Camilla were visiting Brick Lane in East London. Camilla stepped out wearing a brooch crafted in the shape of the Tudor crown, silver framing, sapphires, rubies, and emeralds set into it like a declaration. The Tudor crown is the central symbol on King Charles III's official royal cipher. It is the emblem of his sovereign authority. It is his identity, pressed into metal and stone. And Camilla fastened it to her chest and walked out in front of the world. Royal jewelry experts have long explained that brooches are not incidental accessories in palace life. They are positioned near the heart deliberately. They communicate loyalty, authority, and continuity in ways that no speech can replicate. Queen Elizabeth II used brooches as a form of communication. Throughout her 7-decade reign, and royal watchers around the world became fluent in reading those messages. In that tradition, the Tudor crown brooch carried a message that needed no translation. I carry his crown. I am not beside him temporarily. I am permanent. Palace insiders were reportedly blindsided by how direct it was. But that was only the beginning. 3 months later, on May 6, 2023, at Westminster Abbey, Camilla was crowned Queen Consort alongside King Charles. For her coronation crown, the palace announced that Queen Mary's 1911 crown would be recycled and reset, a decision framed publicly as an act of sustainability and a tribute to history. According to BBC reporting confirmed by Buckingham Palace, the crown was reset using Cullinan 3, 4, and V diamonds, stones from the late Queen Elizabeth II personal jewelry collection. These were not ceremonial display pieces pulled from a vault. Queen Elizabeth had worn the Cullinans 3 and 4 as a brooch, one she had called Granny's Chips, for decades. They had appeared on her chest at state occasions, jubilees, and private portraits for 70 years. The country had watched those stones on the body of a woman they mourned deeply, a woman whose death was still raw and still unprocessed for millions of British people. Camilla wore them on her head at the coronation. The palace called it a tribute. The public received it differently. Royal commentators described the moment as a gut punch. The grief over Elizabeth had not faded. The nation had barely had a year to absorb her absence. And standing at the center of the ceremony that marked the new era was a woman whose entire journey to that moment had been shadowed by the ghost of Princess Diana, a woman the country had never stopped grieving either, in a different but equally raw way. Camilla had spent 30 years being one of the most disliked women in Britain. The adultery with Charles. The breakdown of the Wales marriage. Diana's own words, her description of Camilla as her nightmare, embedded in the public consciousness through the 1995 Panorama interview, one of the most watched broadcasts in British television history. Camilla had navigated all of it through careful, slow, methodical image rehabilitation. She worked charities, she showed up, she stayed quiet, she let Charles defend and advocate for her. And it worked, to a point. She went from reviled to tolerated to, for many, something like accepted. But accepted is not loved. And loved is what the crown requires, and 2023, Prince Harry published his memoir Spare. In it, he described Camilla in terms that no amount of PR could fully absorb. He called her self-serving. He said she had fed stories to the tabloids to build her own image, using the suffering of the people around her as material. He called her dangerous. He used the word villain in a context that made clear he was not being casual about it. These were the words of a stepson. Someone who had watched her operate from inside the palace for years. Someone who, whatever his other controversies, had first-hand knowledge of the dynamics Harry described. His credibility on some topics has been disputed. His credibility on what he personally observed inside his own family is harder to dismiss entirely. And what he described, an operator who understood information management, who knew how press relationships worked, who built alliances and protected her own position with strategic precision, was recognizable to anyone who had watched the institution closely. By January 2026, YouGov data published by Statista confirmed that Camilla's positive approval rating had slid to 42%, with 45% of the British public holding a negative opinion of her, the most unfavorable numbers she had seen since early 2021, before the coronation had temporarily boosted her standing. The coronation bump had dissipated. The jewels and the ceremony and the crown had not, in the end, resolved the underlying problem. A significant portion of the British public had decided who Camilla was long before she became queen, and nothing since had fully revised that verdict. In October 2025, King Charles formally stripped Andrew Mountbatten Windsor of his royal titles. The long-expected step had been delayed for years, through the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, through the disastrous BBC Newsnight interview in 2019 that made things dramatically worse, through the civil lawsuit settlement in the United States in 2022. Now it was done. Andrew was ordered to surrender Royal Lodge, the 30-room Georgian mansion in Windsor he had leased since 2003. He was to relocate to Marsh Farm, a significantly smaller and more isolated property on the Sandringham estate. In February 2026, while Marsh Farm's renovations were still underway, Andrew was temporarily housed at Wood Farm, the same quiet farmhouse where Prince Philip had largely retired from public life before his death in 2021. On the morning of February 19, 2026, Andrew's 66th birthday, police arrived at Wood Farm in a convoy of 6 unmarked cars with approximately 8 plainclothes officers. Thames Valley Police confirmed they were arresting a man in his 60s on suspicion of misconduct in public office, with investigations focused on allegations that Andrew had forwarded confidential government reports to Jeffrey Epstein during his time as the United Kingdom's trade envoy from 2001 to 2011. Andrew spent approximately 11 hours in custody before being released under investigation. King Charles was 1 mile away at Sandringham when it happened. He did not go to his brother. Edward went. According to reporting from Hello magazine and People, Prince Edward was the first senior royal to visit Andrew at Sandringham following the arrest. And crucially, sources indicated that the purpose of that visit was not to provide comfort or solidarity. It was to push Andrew to accelerate his move out of Wood Farm and stop allowing the ongoing situation to damage the family further. Edward, who had maintained a private Easter tradition of visiting Wood Farm with Sophie for years, had seen that tradition disrupted by Andrew's continued presence. And more than that, he had watched a crisis unfold that he understood needed to be contained, not accommodated. That is the portrait of the man now standing beside William in every formal photograph, someone who walked into his own brother's crisis at the worst moment, said what needed to be said, and walked back out without flinching. In April 2024, King Charles released his honors list, the formal recognition of those who had carried the weight of the crown during Charles's period of reduced capacity due to cancer treatment. Queen Camilla was on it. Prince William was on it. Princess Catherine, still recovering from her own cancer treatment, was acknowledged. They were included, rewarded, recognized. Edward and Sophie were not mentioned. Not once. They had taken on solo international tours across Papua New Guinea and Japan. They had filled the calendar. They had done the work of a monarchy that could not fully function without them. And the honors list, the official document by which the institution signals who matters, did not include their names. Royal commentators flagged it publicly. The press noticed. The omission was not subtle. Edward and Sophie said nothing. Not one public word of frustration or disappointment. They simply continued at exactly the same pace. But inside the palace, multiple sources reported that Edward had understood clearly what the omission communicated. While he and Sophie were being passed over, Camilla's inner circle, the people insiders sometimes referred to in less formal terms as her Rottweilers, the advisers and loyalists who had shaped her public positioning for decades, were untouched and protected. Her people were fine. The people who had done the heaviest lifting were invisible to the list. That was not an oversight. That was a message about whose world operated by different rules. And Edward received it. He understood exactly what it meant. From that point forward, sources indicate that his loyalty stopped being diffuse. It became directional. It pointed toward one person, the one person he believed would eventually see it and return it, Prince William. Alongside Edward's deliberate positioning, Sophie's behavior at royal events began to attract careful attention from royal watchers who tracked these things with precision. Her absences were not random. Sophie, a woman who had spent years being quietly excluded from Camilla's inner circle despite doing considerable public work, reportedly skipped specific events. Not royal engagements broadly, but the particular occasions where being present would have placed her visually and socially inside Camilla's orbit. The events where Camilla sat at the ceremonial center, where proximity equaled association, where the camera's framing would have told a story Sophie chose not to tell. Every absence was aimed. Palace observers noted it. Royal correspondents mapped it. And the pattern was clear. Sophie was not disengaging from the institution. She was disengaging from one specific gravitational field within it. Together, Edward and Sophie had made their choice long before anyone formally asked them to make it. They chose before it became necessary. They chose visibly, consistently, and in a language the palace understands perfectly, the language of proximity and distance, of who stands where when the cameras arrive. Here is the structural reality that underlies all of this. Camilla's position as queen exists because Charles built it for her and fought for it on her behalf. When Charles came to the throne in September 2022, her path had been paved through years of Charles's advocacy, Queen Elizabeth's eventual endorsement, and the formal letter Elizabeth had sent on her Platinum Jubilee expressing her wish that Camilla be known as Queen Consort. The whole architecture of Camilla's queenship was constructed by one man and sustained by his presence on the throne. The moment that presence ends, every brick of that architecture becomes negotiable. Royal succession law and convention do not give Camilla automatic rights within a William reign. She would hold a ceremonial title, Queen Mother or Dowager Queen, with no structural authority and no guaranteed position in the court William would build. When William opens the royal vaults for his own coronation, his household will decide what comes out and who wears it. That decision does not belong to Camilla. It never did. It was borrowed. The Cullinan diamonds. The Tudor crown brooch. The careful cultivation of an image built on someone else's symbols and someone else's stones. All of it existed on borrowed time, in a borrowed framework. And the people now helping William design what comes next have, according to multiple observers, been doing that work quietly for years. The block that Prince Edward has helped construct is not a confrontation. There is no shouting match coming, no dramatic exclusion letter, no ceremony of removal. The palace does not work that way. The palace works through positioning. Every time Edward placed himself inside William's visible orbit, at Easter, at state occasions, in the formations the cameras captured, he was doing something specific. He was casting a vote. He was signaling, without a spoken word, where he stood when the era changed. He was helping draw the map of William's future court. And on that map, the geometry is clear. Camilla does not have a seat near the throne in the reign that follows Charles. She does not walk in that procession by right. The people constructing William's future are building it deliberately, methodically, and completely without her at the center. That is the block. And it was finished before Camilla understood it had begun. Consider what the Easter 2026 photograph actually showed. It showed William and Catherine, restored and together, flanked by their children. It showed Edward and his son James beside them. It showed and nearby. It showed the next generation of the working monarchy arranged around the next king. It showed a verdict, rendered not in words but in bodies and distance. The YouGov data from August 2025 tells its own story. William at 74% positive. Catherine at 71%. And at 70%. Charles at 59%. Camilla at 43%, with almost as many Britons holding a negative view as a positive one. Those are the numbers in Charles's own reign, when she is the reigning queen and has every institutional advantage. In a William reign, those numbers will matter enormously. William has watched the public's response to Camilla throughout his entire adult life. He watched what Diana meant to the country. He watched the grief at her death in 1997. He has watched the persistent polling that shows that for a significant portion of British people, the wound of that marriage, of that affair, of Diana's own words has never fully closed. He is not naive about what that history means for the monarchy's standing. Ipsos polling from April 2025 showed that the British public remains split on whether Camilla should even be called Queen Camilla, with 30% believing she should be officially Queen Consort, 23% preferring the title Queen Camilla, and 15% still believing she should be called Duchess of Cornwall. Nearly 2 decades into the marriage, the institution has not resolved this question in the public's mind. A monarch who cares about the monarchy's long-term legitimacy, and William, by every available account, cares deeply, absorbs all of this and acts on it. Royal succession in the United Kingdom is not simply a matter of biology. It is the management of meaning. Monarchs do not just inherit a crown. They inherit a story, and they choose what they do with it. William's story is one of continuity and renewal, built on his mother's memory, on Catherine's popularity, on his children's fresh presence in the public imagination. It is a story that has very little room for the complications that Camilla represents. Not because of personal animosity, there is no evidence of active hostility between William and his stepmother, but because of mathematics. Institutional mathematics. Approval mathematics. The mathematics of what the monarchy needs to be in order to survive in a democratic era that has grown increasingly skeptical of hereditary power. When William's reign comes, Camilla will hold whatever he decides she holds. She will sit where his household places her. The jewelry will go where his household directs it. The diamonds that Queen Elizabeth wore for 70 years, that were reset into Camilla's coronation crown, those stones belong to the crown, not to Camilla personally. They go back into the vault. And when they come out again, they will go to Catherine. That is not a punishment. That is the institutional logic of the monarchy working exactly as it was designed to work. Power is loaned, not given. Position is maintained only for as long as the structure that supports it holds. Camilla spent 30 years building a position on a foundation that belonged entirely to one man. And the men and women who will shape what comes after that man have been making their choices, casting their votes, and drawing their maps for years. What is unfolding is not a palace coup. It is not a scandal. It will not produce a single headline moment of dramatic confrontation. It is something quieter and more permanent than any of those things, a generational handover being shaped in real time, one photograph, one seating arrangement, one absence at a time. Prince Edward, the forgotten youngest brother, the man who spent 30 years being overlooked, turns out to have been watching and understanding everything. He saw who showed up. He saw who was rewarded. He saw what the honors list said about whose world ran by different rules. He watched his wife be quietly excluded and quietly pressed by a machine that did not consider her a member of the inner circle. He watched all of it. He said nothing. He chose a side. And then he made absolutely sure that William, and the palace, could see which side he had chosen. Standing next to the future king on Easter Sunday 2026, surrounded by the family members who will define what the monarchy looks like in the next era, Prince Edward was not simply attending a church service. He was present at the drawing of a new map. He was one of the cartographers. Camilla spent 30 years making the choices that led to this moment. She made enemies at the wrong times. She pushed boundaries that should not have been pushed. She wore jewels that told a story people were not ready to hear. She protected her circle in ways that left the wrong people feeling the cost. The brooch, the crown, the honors list, the Easter photograph. Each one a data point. Each one a chapter in the same story. The story of a position built entirely on borrowed power, and of the moment when the people who hold the lending institution began to decide who the next account would belong to.